From the spring of 2016, when Donald Trump was heading toward becoming the US Republican nominee, to his election on November 8th, 2016, and then throughout his 2017 to 21 presidential term, his attempted coup on January 6, 2021, and even today, with ongoing and ever-growing conspiracy theories around the 2020 election, not to mention also around notions of democratic, Satan-worshiping, sex trafficking, microchipped and vaccine-injecting baby eaters, soon to be vanquished by not only Trump, but alongside him, Q, and a back from the dead duo of John F. Kennedy and JF Kennedy Jr. So throughout all of that and more, news outlets proclaimed that things had become, as The Atlantic put it, unthinkable. Other informational sites across media, across the political spectrum, and even across countries put out similar headlines. Thinking the Unthinkable from the Washington Examiner. Trump as president is unthinkable. That's why so many find it fascinating, from the Washington Post. With Trump, don't confuse the unthinkable with the impossible, CNN. President Donald Trump, 3 words that were unthinkable to tens of millions of Americans, the New York Times. America has done what seemed unthinkable, the Huffington Post. Donald Trump wins, America elects an unthinkable president, from Canada's The Star. And from the UK's The Guardian, the unthinkable is only unthinkable until it happens. Then, like the sack of Rome, it can seem historically inevitable. What does it mean for something to be deemed both unthinkable and historically inevitable? And now that we are, at least for the time being, post the Trump presidency, though hardly post-Trumpism and its dangers, how do we ensure that we do not repeat that once unthinkable history? This question echoes queries and considerations offered certainly by many others. Just to name one, for instance, Wendy Brown's discussion of the ruins of neoliberalism. But I open my reflections on the unthinkable by citing media discourse specifically, because it is my argument that the Trumpian fiasco and the political irrationalities that he exemplifies can only be fully understood in relation to a media framework, a way of thinking or logic constructed by contemporary media, particularly, I suggest, our still most dominant medium, television, that help to produce and thus can help to explain the unthinkable. It has become commonplace to assert that Trump's presidency and the era of politics it's ushered in has operated like a reality TV show with outrageous performances, affective extremes, tribal competition, play with truth, and obsession with popularity measurements. We saw many of these elements on Trump's own reality show, The Apprentice, which paved the way for his presidential run, rule, and then attempt to overrule democracy. But if in producing such shows, the media have conceived the supposedly inconceivable, unpacking exactly what that means and how we might best engage with this requires a more specific consideration of mediatized logics and their way of thinking the unthinkable, of making the phantasmatic equate with the real, the performative produce the truth, feeling become fact, the manufactured brand image guarantee authenticity, and the shared mediaverse divide into separate spheres of reality with their own screens of information. This kind of thinking is not, I suggest, simply opposed to the kind of thought found within feminist, queer, and anti-racist movements that occurred simultaneously with the rise and reign of Trumpism. After all, Trump's election was only 5 years after Occupy Wall Street, in the midst of a thriving Black Lives Matter movement, as the Me Too movement was taking off, when same-sex marriage had recently been legalized across the US, and popular views about LGBTQ folks seem to be shifting dramatically, and more such examples. Yet it is my contention that the very ways in which people imagine and think about categories like gender, sexuality, and race, including modes of imagining and thinking marked as progressive or resistant, are also formed and deformed by a mediatized logic. However discomforting this might seem, there is not, in other words, a simple opposition between the logics that yielded Trumpism and the logics that have yielded current, even seemingly alternative constructions of gender, sexuality, race, and the identifications or disidentifications they may produce. All have been subjected and subject us to the categories more demographically than democratically defined through which we screen the world. By attempting then to think through media, and again, especially televisual logics, we might best be able to engage the very terms of the thinkable and unthinkable that run across political formations, and thus most effectively try to intervene in this nexus. These logics animate more than what some might see as television proper, the box in the living room or bedroom or kitchen or at the local bar, hotel room, doctor's waiting room, and so on. As those ever expanding locations indicate, television has long moved beyond the traditional spot in the home, even as it still remains there too, if now often in large high definition models comparable to the giant screens we might see in airports or on some city streets, or conversely accessed via handheld devices that we can watch wherever and whenever we want. Indeed, the number and sites of video surfaces has exploded over the past decades, putting us truly in a culture of television, seeing at a distance, as all is scanned, streamed, and screened for us. Even as much of today's political rhetoric claims to have no screens, that is, no filters, given the ever more outrageous and unchecked, yet or therefore high profit generating claims spouted by TV hosts and guests, still including, of course, Trump. Televisual logics are thus central to our times and spaces, as television/video is still, as I said, our dominant medium in terms of the comparative amount of time people collectively spend with such material across all the ways it's accessed, even or especially in the age of media convergence, with now a multiplication of screens and streams that follow the same kind of near and far, here and there, present and absent televisual mode. That televisuality is not just a mode of mediation. It's also, I'm suggesting, a mode of thinking or of unthinking. That is, it yields an epistemology, giving us the very categories or their undoing through which we conceptualize, which is why I believe that it's important for scholars here at Political Concepts and elsewhere to themselves try to think through the media and consider that way of forming concepts, which is always already political. One of, if not the founding concept in television studies itself is that of flow, deployed, if not named in the industry, through the network's programming charts, but developed as a theoretical concept by British cultural studies scholar Raymond Williams in his book, Television, Technology and Cultural Form. He used the term to describe how commercial television, and now we could say online video as well, is constructed not really through a sequence of clearly demarcated programs or parts, but as a kind of ongoing scanning and stream of textual material, with each moment leading into the next, the better, of course, to keep viewers tuned in, even or especially across ads and promotional material. Yet televisuality is not only defined by the continuity of this textual stream and the overlapping worlds, both diegetic and real, that it thus links. It is equally defined by discontinuity and fragmentation, offering distributed charges of visual, narrative, and epistemological pleasure across, again, both the text proper and the interrupting, but actually central commercial messages. In this way, televisuality enacts a curious rhythm of flow and segmentation, protraction and interruption, melding and unmooring, yielding a strange sense or nonsense of continuity through discontinuity, totality through disunity, connection through division, and vice versa, discontinuity from what seems continuous, division through the whole. This logic or illogic goes beyond creating a peculiar kind of temporality and spatiality, but comes to define generally our mediatized experiences. That is to say, now simply our experiences. In his writing, Williams described this as a confusing, seemingly irrational, irresponsible flow. But what it is responsible to, of course, is the underpinning consumer capitalist system, and it perfectly accords with and promotes those economic rationalities. Flow is the linchpin that links, as his book title states, technology and cultural form, along with the financial economy and the attention economy, the operations of signification and the rhythms of reception, labor and leisure, the public and the private, the domestic and the social, the personal and the political. On an epistemological level, though, it can seem irresponsible and irrational, or maybe more accurately, paradoxical, as its scanning operates precisely by both articulating and blurring distinctions between extension and repetition, sameness and difference, presence and absence, inside and outside. And across the full output of the medium, other such ostensible but no longer quite binaries as well: information and entertainment, factual and fictional, actual and virtual, reality and fantasy. With the ever expansion and intersection in our current media era of so many different media flows and streams plugging us into the mediaverse, these both articulations and blurrings become only more prevalent and powerful. This can, I suggest, help to explain some of the odd connections and disconnections in not only media, but culture and politics. That is, on a higher level of flow and segmentation, we find both an increasingly totalized mediatization, yet also the gaps and breaks of media bubbles, something that became particularly apparent in the Trump age as he framed all politics via televisual logics. And then even more noticeably in the age of COVID, especially at the start, when we were all told to stay home and to be good citizens, to stay away from each other, and instead to connect via televisual video streams, showing our community togetherness precisely by watching apart, conjoining in, even caring for a shared world through and because of separate monitors. Within such situations, recent elections, the pandemic, the attempted coup, current partisan fights, even now the current situation in Russia with Russia and Ukraine, some people come to be taken by a kind of medial epistemophilia, trying to watch and know all. Others strive to tune it out or only ever to see what exists within their preferred little slice of the mediaverse, their own comfortable media bubble, which may seem segmentable, but actually depends on the larger flows of the mediaverse to sustain it. At the same time then, television, along with its convergent digital sites, both simulates and impedes the possibility of a commons, creating a shared logic, yet highly fragmented mediatized fields of knowledges, that is both mergings and divisions and how and what is considered thinkable or unthinkable. Indeed, knowledge is now commodified and branded with different kinds of knowledges or ignorances functioning as selling and buying points, as well as points of identification and disidentification for and with particular networks. And networks both in the institutional sense, right, MSNBC, Fox News Network, One American News Network, and also in the informal social sense of people's networked affiliations. The effectivity of brand identifications is only heightened, not disrupted, by television's paradoxical logics, which, as I've indicated, both reify and rupture traditional epistemological categories. In the televisual world, that is to say, our world, the untrue can seem the most believable, the fake, the most real, the put on, the most authentic. precisely because, not in spite of their outlandishness. Donald Trump is again the exemplar here. It is his insistent performance, his absolute fidelity to his brand image, continuous with televisual modes of branding that also rely on discontinuous audience segments, that makes him seem so authentic to his followers, regardless of or simply beyond the reality status of his claims. Or rather, another kind of reality status is operative here. What matters is not truth or lies, real or fake news. Trump can lie more than anyone, and yet also, in fact, therefore, seems so real to his followers because of the no holds barred intensity and consistency of his always on brand enactment of self, with that performativity itself a reality, and that reality uniting in mutual feeling his segment of the market. And it is not just Trump and Trumpism that operates according to this televisual logic, but conspiracy theorizing more broadly. Rather than a lack of evidence, or even evidence directly to the contrary, undermining such formations, this lack can enhance them, as it opens, even necessitates the possibility of more and more narration, plotting, cogitation, mediatized discussion. That is to say, the more conspiratorial claims seem unthinkable, the more a conspiracy invites thinking, inciting speculations and intrigue, revised and rebooted theories, new stories with new characters to keep it going, fresh connections to make across all the disconnections, and so on. So for instance, if the Q predicted storm of a slew of arrests of all those pizza and baby eating libs didn't come on the announced date in November, it's only because there's an even greater storm with more arrests, and even John F. Kennedy coming back from hiding after faking his death to help with the roundup coming in December. And if that doesn't happen, it's only because there needs to be prep time for JFK Jr. also to come back to life too in January or February, and so on and so on and so on. And I can add the ever extension of this now even encompasses the Russian invasion into Ukraine, which QAnoners and Fox News hosts are largely supporting because of their view that Trump's friend Putin has now joined the fight against the supposedly global, or as they not so subtly suggest, Jewish elites, who they see as behind the Biden-supported, aiming to distract us from their nefarious deeds, satanic international cabal. So again, the narrative can be continually extended to incorporate whatever happens. Defined via flow, television, of course, is based on the lure of just such endless narration and the pleasure and power this can yield. Whether through constant repetition, like in classic series form, in which a basic situation is played out over and over with only slight variations and a kind of reset to stabilization each episode, or whether through constant expansion, like in serial form, in which we're in an endless, irresolvable middle with more and more destabilization propelling us on. Either way, televisuality strives ever to maintain its worlds and worldviews. TV shows and performances, which of course include today our mediatized political shows and performances, strive to find a way to continue and continue and continue, unless or until eventually they are canceled. And even then, they may continue through the further media productions of the audiences and communities to which they give rise, such as via fan vids and fan fiction, including comparable conspiracy vids and plots. To borrow a turn of phrase from the self-reflexive program WandaVision, what are the grievance-driven musings of QAnoners, if not fan love persisting? There is thus persistence on the level of audience fantasy, even or maybe especially when something is canceled, which itself is a fascinating term. Indeed, it's striking to me that the whole discourse and phenomena these days of cancellation and cancel culture, right? People saying things that are deemed beyond the pale, just too unthinkable, While, of course, the fear or recognition is that folks may be tempted to think such things all too readily, that discourse of cancellation, in fact, derives from television. It's, of course, a TV industry term, now broadly applied to other cultural situations of ceaselessness until and beyond cessation. And it's equally striking to me that the television origin of the term, while so obvious in a way, is rarely even noticed by those who use it, that people don't try to think through that connection. Within television studies itself, cancellation might be thought of as not just an institutionally determined ending to a formally would-be endless text, but as a way to manage the affects and thus continue the logics of televisual flow and segmentation, connection and disruption, closeness and distance. Patricia Mellencamp, for example, discusses the logic of what she calls creation/cancellation, in which television across its forms intermittently heightens tension and anxiety in things like breaking news, sensationalized reality stunts, or melodramatic narrative cliffhangers, only so as to be able itself to try to soothe such tension, thereby again keeping us watching and watching, ever tuned into the televisual, the incessant scanning, streaming, and screening of our world. In this way, the televisual operates like a self-perpetuating machine, temporarily exacerbating just so as to ease, temporarily easing just so as to exacerbate, thereby relentlessly reproducing its logics, affects, economics, and politics. Yet might this be a reproduction with a difference, a repetition that also provides a shift, one that, terrifying in some ways, yet perhaps transformative in others, may make what had been unthinkable become newly, or like a TV reboot, renewedly thinkable. I began with the example of the unfortunately all too televisually thinkable unthinkability of Donald Trump as president and now as precedent for US political figures in this era. He is equally a model of how we have moved in and perhaps almost through the strange logics I've been attempting to describe. Indeed, there's a way in which, sorry, I lost my place for a sec. Indeed, there's a way in which Trump and Trumpism have seemed to carry the logics of mediatized neoliberal consumer commodity culture, in other words, the logics of television, to such an extreme that they are and reformed, shifting then into something entirely else. That is, the Trump and Trump-inspired show, which I'm using as shorthand for this whole mode of politics, seen now in everything from mainstream elections to the darkest corner of the web. This mode today is so fashioned around the self that in place of self-governance, there's an evacuation of governance. So performed that authenticity is precisely the reality of the unreal. So consumed with the claim of speaking the truth of what others are supposedly thinking but too scared to say, that it tips into obsessional phantasmatics. So reducing of social dynamics to just competitive economic rationalities that this becomes proudly irrational. So much care of the self that there is nothing but spite over perceived injuries to a self now defined via ever more specified identities, ever more ongoing yet repetitive lists of slights, and ever more tribal terms, right? Like the tribes of the reality program Survivor. In sum, Trump, as the embodiment of the calculating reality TV star, has yielded Trumpism and its various offsprings as what escapes calculation, pushing past not only democratic or even just demographic appeals to now truly demagogic ones. Television and its convergent media do more than just communicate and spread such messages, or really what are both more or less than simply messages, but modes of being, feeling, thinking. It is the very twists of televisual type logics, the connected disconnections and vice versa, the spiralings and repetitions, the moving through while still never really moving past, right? It is those logics that underpin and overwrite these phenomena, which are effects of a mediatized culture as much as effects of political discourse. Or more accurately, as I've been arguing, these political discourses are intimately tied to media and mediatized modes of thinking or unthinking. And trying to come to terms with such logics, or the push past logics into illogics, critical and political thinking has, in some ways, it seems to me, been trying to catch up with the televisual thinking, even if not aware of doing so. That is, one might see similar moves to the ones I've been tracing, even if with quite different investments in various intellectual approaches, such as in theories of affect, of performativity, of vibrancy, of critical and creative fabulation. These theories register the force of feelings, fantasies, and illogics, those very forces made operative and profitable via televisual media formations that cut across divisions between reason and affect, reality and fantasy, movement and stasis, subject and object. To suggest that in their attempt to think across such divisions, scholarly theories are in a way catching up to the televisual is not at all to disparage such approaches. Quite the contrary, they have opened up critical interventions, particularly in engaging issues of race and ethnicity, gender and sexuality, bodies and matter, knowledge and imagination. But it is to suggest that these interventions, however daring and different they might seem, indeed that they are, they still exist in relation to, not outside of, the logics of our mediatized culture, even the logics of that medium, TV, seen as the most mainstream, the least thoughtful, daring, and different. In fact, that relation is why these approaches can affect interventions, that is to say, mediations. In other words, it is because of their own disruption through connection, difference through repetition, distance through closeness, that the flow of critical modes of thought can be equal to the flow and twist of mediatized thought. Far from rejecting the televisual, just condemning it as a site of stupidity, or perhaps worse, not considering media at all and trying to come to terms with today's politics, I urge that we purposely try to think about, think with, indeed recognize how we already are, even if unwittingly, thinking through their logics, or again, illogics. In that way, I suggest we might best conceptualize how certain things that had seemed unthinkable just a short while ago no longer are. And we might imagine how to bring our own visions, even those that may seem currently unthinkable, that is, truly our own visions from afar, truly our televisions, how we can bring those also into thinkability and possibility. Thank you.